Yeah. So can we start with like what does your program look like?
Yeah,
Take me through it. Let's start with Sunday. Take me through a Sunday.
great. So, one thing that is key to know about the congregation I work for is we are a big church. We are a large church system. We have a lot of adults and we have a lot of kids. And not only kind of a large number of kids, but a large percentage of kids. Kids make up a large percent of our active congregants, families.
Has it always been that way?
So I've been here for 2 years, but we have historically had one of the largest RE programs in the country.
Yeah.
So my understanding is that has historically been true. Yeah. So on a given Sunday, we have probably like 125 to 175 kids come through between like nursery and senior high on a Sunday, and that's between two services. So we have a 9 and 11. So on Sunday mornings, the kids, so the exception to all of this is our 8th grade OWL program, which runs for the duration of our Sunday morning, so 9 to 10:30 or 11 to 12:30. All other grades, also except for senior high, start in the worship service. Um, Okay, there's a lot of exceptions. Also, except nursery and pre-K. So our kindergarten through 9th grade starts in the worship service. And we start our worship with usually some high energy interactive singing, things like clapping or moving or some other sort of responsive music to get folks moving and ready.
Hold
Uh,
on. You clap in your sanctuary.
we do. Do you know
That's
Dr.
wonderful. No, I'm like, I
No.
think I know why there's so many
Yeah.
families.
Well, our director of worship and music arts is Dr. Glenn Thomas Rideout, who
No,
is just
glorious,
amazing.
glorious.
So he has really pushed us to be more, to move our bodies more, be more embodied. So yeah, it's really common for there to be clapping or actions or we're making noises with our bodies, and so really kind of interactive music in that way. And then we have some words of welcome. A youth or a kid or a youth will light our chalice for us in the sanctuary. And then we're really moving away from calling it a time for all ages, because really the idea is that any part of the worship service that kids are in is accessible to all ages. So we're really trying to move away from calling like a 3.5 minute part of the worship service the time for all ages, and really trying to shift that orientation about
Nice.
really accessibility in worship. I mean, for
Yeah,
all sorts of people.
that's right.
So then after we have our welcome and our chalice lighting, we'll have some sort of again kind of interactive engagement. So sometimes it's improv, sometimes it's a game, sometimes it's an imagination exercise, sometimes it's like a conversation with the people around you. So some sort of interactive piece that gets us, that's not someone talking at you, but that is participatory, or you're pointing out things in a storybook or watching a video. And then the kids dismiss to their classes. And language we're really trying to use this year is our congregation, like many EU congregations, has a strong idea of what RE is and where RE happens and when and for who. And so language that we're really trying to use this year, we're having some ritual Sundays. We're calling them ritual Sundays that are multi-generational,
Mhm.
shorter, really interactive. Um, and the language we're using is that on most Sundays, religious education is class, and on ritual Sundays, religious education is worship. Worship is religious education is worship. So we're really trying to kind of queer people's understandings of where we
Yeah.
religiously educate, which is everywhere. We're always religiously educating. So anyway, so then the kids shift into the class element of their religious education from the worship element of their religious education. And we have co-created a really beautiful ritual this year to facilitate that dismissal or transition, which I think has historically felt like, okay, bye. Let us talk about adult stuff now. And with some kind of stories and rituals that I learned from other religious educators in Laredo, now we have a really beautiful ritual. Another key part of how our programming works is that many of our high school youth are youth staff members who teach our younger RE classes. And so at this transition point in the service, one of the youth staff comes up and lights a lantern from the chalice and then leads the younger kids out. And our grades are kindergarten, first grade, second, third grade, and fourth, fifth grade. And each of those classes has a banner, like it's on a pole,
Oh,
a banner,
yeah.
and they each follow their banner out of the sanctuary. The piece about the banner that I really love is this was a collaboration with some of our older folks, especially our older women. They're quilted banners,
Mm.
and there are little white squares on the banners that are pinned on and then sewed in. And on those squares, at the end of their RE class every week, the class draws on those squares a representation of what they have learned. And so then every week, the congregation, we don't highlight it or talk about it, but the congregation literally sees what these kids are learning and doing in their other space.
Oh my gosh, I'd be running to look at that every Sunday. That's
Yeah, it's
fantastic.
very cool. So then our kindergarten through fifth grade goes down into a children's chapel that's led by the youth staff. We do, there was a Jet Pig song. There are several, but one of them we do as a chant. We don't use the melody because the youth staff are in high school and really embarrassed about singing in front of people. So we made it into a chant. So we do that. They talk about our kindergarten through fifth grade curriculum is centered around the updated shared values in combination with our congregation's visionary goals. So anyway, I'm not going to get too in depth into the curriculum right now, but so each Sunday they'll talk about in the children's chapel which of the values they're talking about today. They'll introduce the values. They'll do the verse of the chant that has to do with the values. Sometimes they'll play a game, and then the kids dismiss to their individual classrooms. So K first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and then in those classrooms they have more age-specific curriculum that dives into more of the value, either with a story or an activity or a conversation. So, for example, last Sunday, our fourth and fifth graders made Get Out the Vote posters in their RE classes that they hung all over the church. They were very great. And those classes are also primarily taught by our youth, with then two trained adult volunteers in the space to support the youth and their leadership. And what I always say is like, to just exist with a prefrontal cortex fully developed in the space. And to just like have maybe an eye of, oh, this is maybe escalating, or this kid's bleeding, or, just like, just a little bit of like, I've
Yeah,
seen someone throw
yeah,
up before,
yeah,
just to like
yeah.
be in the space and to be supportive and
How do you prepare or develop training? I'm thinking of teacher trainings that I've been to when I've taught religious education at different grades. Do you do like a teacher training for the youth?
yeah.
How do they know what to do?
Yep. So at the beginning of the year, this year we always have youth staff trainings. And then this year we had a extended training. It was on a Saturday from like 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. And we with adults and youth. And then
Mhm.
we broke them out in different configurations over the course of the training. So sometimes it was with the adults talking about how to support the youth staff, and the youth were talking about how to work with adults.
Yep.
And sometimes they were in their teams, like their teaching team in their classroom, getting to know each other and looking at the curriculum. We rooted our training in the shared values and We also have a Chonithan Families Advisory Team that's made up of adults, and over the last year, they developed a set of guiding principles for our Chonithan Families programming. And so we also grounded the training in those principles and what does it look like to play those out in the classroom? What does it mean that we care about these and that we want it to be, we want these values to show up in every space.
That's brilliant.
And what does that mean? And we have just some amazing folks in our congregation who are teacher trainers or have done teacher trainings. So also doing some stuff about sensory regulation and conflict, kind of like restorative conflict practices. We're really, really, really awesome folks helping to lead that. So that's really good. So it felt important that there was some shared information that they all have, adults and youth, and sometimes to break out separately also, for the adults to ask questions and for the teenagers to say, we don't need adults. You know, like you have to have space.
You got to work that out.
You got to work that out. You got to have those spaces. So, yeah.
You know, I think of like the tension between what is faith formation and what is religious education, right? It's kind of this, I love this tension that we're talking about across the land now. And, you know, if you want to know how to do something, you teach it. So the idea of having your youth teach it, then you have no question. They're going to know this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was amazing. So these youth who are teaching, they know our shared values. They know all of them. I mean, I took some of these 10th graders. We just went on a pilgrimage to Boston, like a heritage trip, which I also want to come back to, talking about post-curricular faith development. And we were talking, and one of the other kids was like, what even are our uni values? And one of the kids who's a youth staff said the entire chant. She said this entire chant that covers all of the values, like explains them, because she does it every Sunday with these kids, you know? So it really is like they are learning this stuff and they are getting to know it, and it's good leadership development. They're getting to have relationships with other adults in the congregation. Like it just is all really good. Yeah. Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah. So that's our kindergarten to 5th grade. And then 8th grade is all OWL. So that's just adult facilitators.
And you have, am I right that you have an OWL coordinator on staff?
That's true. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So it's amazing. So
Dreamy.
she's 15 to 20 hours a week. Yeah. And she coordinates all of our OWL programs, which is 1st, 2nd grade, 5th, 6th grade, 8th grade, and adult. So those are all in her professional wheelhouse on staff.
And I want to put a plug. So you're a large congregation, but if you are a religious educator in a smaller congregation going, I wish we had that, pair up with another congregation and share staff, please, people. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so I've been in this role, I'm an interim, and I've been in this role for about a year and a half.
Yeah.
But before this, I was in a very small congregation. I mean, it felt very small. We had probably 30 kids total, so not as small as some congregations. But we ran an OWL program collaboratively with like 3 or 4 churches, including kind of youth and adults. And we had 19 kids, you know, like 19, 7th to 9th graders. So that was like the most successful thing we did was shared ministry among congregations.
That's great. And that's our polity, I think, at its very best. How can we share? How can we cross-pollinate?
Totally. Yep. But in order to get there, you have to get over this kind of possessive or competitive feeling.
Yeah.
That can feel really live. And like that's something I noticed in like trying to build these relationships as well. You know, this isn't our church, and we would use this different, maybe slightly different language, or or what if our kids like this other church better? So to me, that was like I noticed both with myself and my colleagues working through some of that, and like just wanting to acknowledge that that's really live too, trying to get through that. Maybe not in our values.
Thanks for naming it.
Yeah. And then we also have 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th grade Sunday morning programming. And 7th grade and up are just led by adults, no youth. And 6th grade has 2 of our oldest youth staff in the room, just to give a little separation. And our 6th grade curriculum is in 2 parts. The first semester is, and these were developed by Lauren Wyeth. So the first semester is taking our places, kids volunteering in different parts of the church and learning about the history, figuring out what makes church work. The second part of the semester is one of my favorite curricula that Lauren has written called Rites of Passage. And are you familiar with this?
I love this stuff. Tell us more about it.
So she developed this curriculum in which the kids learn about Unitarian Universalism. And then at the end of the year, there's a ceremony with their families where they give a little elevator speech about what church means to them. Then there's a really beautiful ceremony with their families at this gathering where they sign a covenant to take on a new responsibility and a new privilege in their family, which is just really, really cool. Really great example of family faith formation. I think is probably the part of our program, the part of our whole program that does that the best, the family element. And then in 7th grade, we do neighboring faiths. In 9th grade, we do coming of age. And then fall of 10th grade, folks who've completed coming of age can go on the Boston Pilgrimage Heritage Trip. Yeah. And then we also have senior high youth group that meets both on Sundays and a couple other times. And we just started a junior high youth group as well that meets one Wednesday a month.
Now, you've been there since coming back from pandemic. So you wouldn't have experienced that, but you certainly would have heard lore. How do you know how lockdown and pandemic affected?
Yeah. I mean, I think of this in a couple different ways. So I think about how it affected maybe what I would call engagement, maybe what a lot of folks would measure as attendance. But then I also think about the sorts of programmatic or curricula changes that happened. And of course, those are really related.
Can I go back? Because you were so brilliant with the stuff. And I want to hold up in case somebody may have missed what you just did there. Attendance, counting, engagement, measuring, right? I often talk about the difference, and
that's right.
We can get really caught up in the counting things. And then I will call the question of what are we trying to avoid by not actually measuring something of consequence. So
that's right.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
So I would say in terms of engagement, we saw the biggest change in engagement with our older youth. And that's true nationally, that's true in schools, that's true in sports. Those group of youth who were high school aged when COVID hit, were really impacted. So we only have one senior this year. But and that's, one senior in a program of 300 kids, right? So that is weird. But we have probably a dozen really engaged 11th graders, right? So we're seeing that shift as this group of kids kind of moves out of high school.
Yeah.
We also saw something that the youth will talk about is that is notable to me is they were really tracking what they missed. So they will say, I didn't get to do neighboring faiths. I never went on the site visit. Or I did OWL in 9th grade when we came back because we couldn't do it online. Or my sister didn't get to go on the Boston trip, or her bridging was online. So something that's clear to me is how much these kids track our program and know what they are doing and what they aren't doing and what other kids have done and haven't done and the ways that they talk to each other. So that's something that strikes me as not as necessarily, it didn't change because of the pandemic, but it is more obvious to me that they are really clear about what experiences they did and didn't have at church. And what experiences they would have had or were supposed to have. Things like overnights, things like some of the OWL kids didn't get to have an OWL overnight. They had an OWL lock-in because they had to be masked and it was during the day. So also it illustrates for me which parts of this the youth are most connected to and tapped into. The biggest change was the biggest curriculum or programmatic. Well, a couple things. One, there was a parents of young children group that Lauren ran on Zoom that, I mean, like saved families. I mean, like the way that people talk about that group, I mean, still, I mean, that was like 4 years ago. These people have elementary schoolers now. And the ways they talk about what that group meant to them during lockdown, it was just so, salvific for these
Yeah.
families.
Yeah.
So I'm also disabled. I do a lot of disabled organizing with just disability organizing with disabled folks. And that, like, people will say, good things can't happen on Zoom. Real connection only happens in person. I just like call total bullshit on that. And this is such a great example of like this group that was so meaningful to these families
Yeah.
that probably only could have happened on Zoom because
Yeah.
of where they were in their lives. I mean, is why some of these people even are still trying to connect to this congregation because of how important that was. So I want to lift that up as, like, I think a lot of times when I think about, changes during COVID, I really think in the negative. And I just want to like highlight this as something that was really, really
Oh,
positive.
yes. Yes. For all the things that you just said. I'm grateful for getting more people online.
Yeah,
Yep.
totally. So, but the biggest really curricular shift was moving away from curriculum in any group younger than sixth grade. So they had Rainbow Path, they had Child's Children, and other iterations of that from preschool through fifth grade. And when they came back from lockdown, they really moved into kind of just free choice. Um, and so that was a big shift for families and a big shift for kids. And so we did a lot of listening around that last year when I arrived. And families really wanted to go back to curriculum. What they really wanted was these kids to learn more about Unitarian Universalism and to have a more structured environment in which they could have scaffolded social relationships. Um, what that has looked like is us going back to curriculum, but I'm really interested. So we just started that this fall, and we're having a couple listening sessions coming up. And it is so interesting what I'm hearing from some of the same people who wanted this, being like, these kids can't sit still that long. Like, it seems like it is just so, anyway, it is so fun to learn with human beings. Um, so I'll be like really curious to hear what comes out of these listening sessions. And what has felt really important about this is that the shift that we made from um, really, really no structure. The kids would come down from church, they would choose an art project or games, and then they would go to that. But there wasn't, I think it was one extreme. It was not like the art projects were connected to the service or about our values. The games weren't. It was really kind of just free play. Just, that's not the right language, but it was really free choice play. And also, there were no adults in the classrooms. It was only led by youth staff. So I think there's a lot there to unpack. But what felt really important is that the shifts that we made over the summer and this year were led by, it was a very collaborative process between me and other staff and parents and caregivers and longtime congregants, that it didn't feel to me, and I don't think it felt to other people, like I was coming in and making this change, but really that I was coming in and doing a lot of listening and organizing people. Like, over the summer, 3 of our members of the advisory team, rewrote the K1 second, third, fourth, fifth curriculum to update it to be about the shared values. They did a ton of work on this. So I'm really curious to hear how, kind of coming back to these listening sessions with the youth staff and the volunteers and the parents and caregivers, to hear like, okay, here's one version of what you were asking for. Here's how we implemented what we heard, and how is it working, and how is it playing out. And I'll be really interested to hear how that goes. But it feels important to name that was a deeply collaborative process that was not staff facilitated, but not kind of staff led. So it feels important to name that here as well as we're thinking about movement and programs.
Fantastic. Okay, I'm going to my questions to see what have I not asked you. What advice do you have? Like, what about your program do you think is transferable to congregations of smaller size? And what advice then would you have for them?
Yeah, I would say a couple things. And one, I am shoehorning this into this question because I want to talk about it. But I just took a group of 10th grade youth with some colleagues on this Boston Pilgrimage Heritage trip. And what was really clear to me about this experience was most of these kids have grown up in our congregation. They were really, everyone was impacted by COVID, but they were in 5th grade during lockdown and then, kind of reemerged in high school with just really went from 5th grade to high school. But
can I put a pause here, because I have such empathy for the upper elementary and middle school folks who went into lockdown. So developmentally, the time of your life when you're supposed to turn outward away from your family, and you were all of a sudden in lockdown with adults that you're trying to move away from.
I know.
I'm waiting for, I don't even know what, a whole group of scientists and medical to figure out how that has affected our brains.
I know. Like, the thing I think about is the developmental task of adolescence is finding your role in a group, and there were no groups.
No.
You can't accomplish this, the main thing your body and brain want you to do, because it doesn't exist, so this is a group, and I really feel for this group. This is a group that many of our volunteers and staff really struggled with when they were in 8th and 9th grade. And I understand the challenges. And I also am like, can you fucking blame them? What else can we fucking expect?
That's
they're
right.
working out 6th grade developmental problems with 9th grade hormones. How do you win? So anyway.
Yeah.
So
I have a 16-year-old, and so I'm in the expectations and the needs on the my strategies for his health is way different than it is for my who are now 30-year-olds.
Yes, totally. Yeah. So, but what I really wanted to say about, and so this group really affected by lockdown, really affected developmentally. But something that I just want to lift up that I've been saying a lot is these kids got to 10th grade. Most of them grew up in the church. At least a lot of them grew up in either this church or another UU church, or lifelong UUs. And they got to September of 10th grade and could tell me functionally nothing about Unitarian Universalism, about the history, about where we came from, about what the relationship is between Unitarian Universalism and Christianity. We're just totally had no sense, or no sense that they felt confident enough to share, which is what I know. And so a lot of our learning, a lot of the preparation for the pilgrimage and the work we did on the pilgrimage was really basic. What is Unitarianism? What is Universalism? Who are these people? They were like, who's Henry David Thoreau again? I've never heard of him. Why are we going to Walden Pond? What is this place? Anyway, and what I keep saying is, because I think some of the volunteers and parents, what I keep saying is, this is not the first time these youth have been taught this, but it is the first time they have learned it. And I just want to make this distinction for myself and for other folks working with kids and youth, that the difference between teaching kids something and between them learning it can be really disparate. There can be a big gap between what we feel like we're teaching them and what they are learning. And so a lot of what I'm taking away from this pilgrimage is how can they learn this sooner? And like what does it mean for the ways we're teaching for them, to do some of this learning sooner, so then, we can do more kind of diving into a little bit more complexity on this pilgrimage at this time we have. Um, so as I'm thinking about, like, what's transferable to other congregations, like one thing that I think is key is just like paying attention to what the kids have learned, like what do they know, and trying to give some distance between, like, but I said that 10 times, and like just trying to give that some space and say,
Yes.
how can I figure out what they have actually learned? um like that I'm taking that away. That felt really big for me to be thinking about.
That's genius. And it's so true. It's like that for parents as well.
Yeah,
It's like when are they gonna learn to fold laundry? Like, come on, oh
exactly. Exactly. Once I think about this with my partner too, that I'll come back from talking to a friend and be like, oh my gosh, you'll never guess what Emma said. And she can be like, I've been saying that, for 6 months. And it's like, oh, but I had
yes.
to hear it from this other person and this other
Yeah.
context.
Oh
And
my
taking
gosh,
that
yes.
seriously,
Yep.
like taking,
Yep.
like, not passing judgment, but just saying, yeah, maybe you are only learning this because it's tied to this big weird new thing you're doing that you're really
Yep.
jazzed about, in a way that you're really not jazzed about um, sitting through class for an hour and a half on your day off from your full-time school job. Like, why would I think you would learn that here? The other Okay, Miss Sue, another thing, something that has been really key for me. I always say I am a faith former. I am in ministry. Uh, I am mostly an organizer. Like really, so much of this is organizing work. So much of it is
Yes.
organizing work. And what I mean by that is it is listening. It is being responsive. It is not being tied to history or tradition for history and tradition's sake. It is going where the energy is, and finding the people who have the energy,
Yeah.
um,
And
and
finding the
and
people for whom they can hear.
yes,
Like that's
yes,
key. Like you were just talking about that, but that's a big piece of community energy. If you've got the micro or the megaphone and nobody's hearing you, find who should have the megaphone.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Or like who they need to talk to. I was talking to a volunteer today, and she was like, "I'm really upset about this thing I learned at the budget meeting." And I was like, "How about I connect you with our treasurer who led the budget meeting, who is like gonna be the person who can do anything with this thing you're telling me." So much of it is the connections and the relationships and knowing people. But I think what was so key and successful for me as an organizer in this congregation is last year we probably had maybe 15 consistent adult volunteers in our programming, and that's 0 to 18 years old. And this year we have 90 consistent adult volunteers in our programming, which is like a huge percentage of even adults who come to church on a Sunday. Like, we're 1,000 member congregation. We have maybe 300, 350 on a Sunday, and 90 people are active once a month or more volunteers with our kids. And that happened through one-to-one direct asks, or through me asking other people to make one-to-one direct asks, like
Yeah.
maybe 10 of these people came because I put it in the newsletter, and whatever, 80 of them came because I said, hey, you have great energy. I think you'd be great in our 6th grade group because I've heard you talk about this and you're so passionate. And so to me it is so, and that people trust that you're listening to them, that someone says, hey, I don't like this curriculum and my kid's not learning anything about Unitarian Universalism. And I'm like, hey, I'm so glad you told me that. Let me, take that to what we're working on, and then to do something with it and about it, makes people trust you. And then they're like, yeah, I'll
That's
volunteer in your
right.
program. I think you're going to listen to me if something goes wrong. I think you're going to
That's right.
support me. So, like, I think also as we can think about our role within the congregation as organizers of both adults and youth, not in like a manipulative, coercive way, but just in like when we're in real relationship with people and they feel like you know who they are and that you're listening to them, like they can catch the vibe. You know, they can get on board if they feel like this is a responsive program that cares about their kids.
Allison, I don't, how did I get this far in my career and I've never heard like DRE as community organizer? And you were absolutely spot on.
Yeah, feels
Brilliant.
really true. Feels really
Yeah.
true. And then one more thing that I just want to lift up here, and this goes back to responsiveness and listening to youth, also listening to youth and taking youth seriously, even when youth are in conflict with adults. I think about this year's 10th graders, last year's 9th graders. Again, just like really got dealt a shit hand. And what we were really seeing is like what they wanted was space for social, low stakes social connection. And the volunteers were really seeing that as like, they're not sitting still and listening to our lesson, you know? And I was like, they like people at church. Like this is so awesome. Isn't that what we want? Anyway, but we got to this point where we were like, we are making Sunday morning do too many things. We are asking this one, and it's a long time. We have an hour and a half, maybe an hour 15 when the kids are in the classroom. And we were like, that is doing too much. It is both their only social time to see each other and the time where we want them to learn like about asking questions about God and death and sin and hell and the afterlife, you know, like this, and remembering people. And like this is, we want them to learn that. And they mostly want to talk to their friends. And like that is creating a lot of conflict because the space is not big enough to do both of it in the way things are structured right now. So we started a once a month, our congregation has community dinners, free congregation dinners. And we've really made a push for, and then programming afterwards for adults. And this year we've really pushed a lot of youth programming there too. So now after community dinner, there's either childcare or a youth group like thing for kids ages 6 months to 18. And then there's a parent group that runs at that same time. And there's like, there's various groups for adults also. So in that space, we created a junior high youth group that is like just space. Like I'm doing this with my arms, like just clearing the space.
Yes.
And it is like, they had a bonfire. They're gonna like make some sandwiches. They're gonna paint a mural. They're gonna like, this is like the stakes of their lives. This is the other thing I came back from this pilgrimage with. The stakes of their lives are so high. The stakes of their lives are so high. Their academics are high stakes. Their sports are high stakes. Their music's high stakes. Like, even when they're really bad at things, they're high stakes. Like, they're still putting a lot of pressure on themselves about it. And just to create a space that is like really low stakes. That is like, you are here to like roast a marshmallow and like, and have adults ask you how you're doing, you know, and so being able to offer that space, I think it has differentiated for kids and adults what we're doing where. And we've been really clear that like, you don't have to come on Sundays to come on Wednesdays. You don't have to come on Wednesdays to come on Sundays. Like, these are spaces where you can choose what you need when. And so anyway, so just to say like just the other thing I would say is, especially with junior high and high school, is like just the need for space, like just the need for, like, the phrase I've been using is low stakes, values-based third space. Like that is like low stakes, values-based third space is like what these kids need, really, really.
Yeah.
And it's gotten me asking a lot of questions about, I was just listening to the Threshold Conversations on Coming of Age yesterday. I'm very behind the ball on that. But just like this idea of these credos are so historically important to this congregation, this program. And after spending time in Boston with these kids and listening to these other kids, I'm like, we're giving them like fucking homework at church that we're judging them on really publicly? Like, does that align with low stakes, values-based third space? that's opening a lot of questions for me too. But where we've started with that is having these youth groups that are really totally sans curriculum and are just spaces to exist together in gentleness and fun.
Allison, I am so grateful for you, your leadership there at the congregation. And I'm grateful that you've shared with us so that it can ripple out. I'm just really, really grateful.